Hello, everyone. Welcome to month 3 or class 3 of our yearly series. We're doing this Preventing Diabetes course as a series over the year, one class a month in 2025. And just a heads up, I have the flu, the actual flu. I'm getting on the upswing of things here, but I may need to turn off my audio and video for a moment if I need to cough. So just giving you a little warning, I may do that. Looks like we've got quite a few people joining. Welcome. We are also going to be recording this so that you can view it later as needed. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Megan Ellison. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I'm also a certified diabetes care and education specialist. And I'm coming to you from my home, actually, my home office today in Snohomish County. And Stilly Valley Health Connections is the hospital district number 3 in Snohomish County who is sponsoring our series. So that's who you signed up through. And Stilly Valley hosts a lot of other things as well, other classes. We do on-site cooking demos in their teaching kitchen. And they have other on-site things like balance classes and support groups. So check out their website for other community resources. Tonight, we're going to be talking about weight management in the context of chronic conditions, specifically thinking about better blood sugar control, but also weight management can help in, a lot of other chronic conditions like, for example, blood pressure and cholesterol, and thinking about, long-term heart health and brain health. So yeah, it is a piece of the puzzle. And as a dietitian, we really are the specialists in the management of body mass. And we do get a lot of education and training in this area. Okay, last month we talked about overall dietary patterns. Hopefully you were able to take that quiz and see, what you're maybe missing in your intake, what you could maybe increase a little bit, and then pick a couple changes to work on for the coming month. If any of you did that and want to share it, you can go ahead and put that in the Q&A. Our chat is disabled, and this is a webinar, so I cannot see or hear you. But if you want to, put anything in the Q&A as we go along, feel free to share with the group. Or if you have a question for me, put it in there and I will check it as we go. But yeah, I'd love to know if you've made some changes so far. All right, let's talk a little bit about weight management and what are the benefits if you do have some extra weight to lose, which the majority of our population is either in that overweight or obese category. And we'll talk about what that means in just a little bit here. So that's the majority of people, majority of adult Americans. What are the benefits? When we're thinking about preventing diabetes, specifically, we're talking about like lowering the insulin resistance. And if you missed class 1, go back to the recording for class 1 or ask Stilly Valley to send that to you, because we do talk about that as part of the puzzle for this development of diabetes, like the underlying pathophysiology. Part of what's going on is this insulin resistance. So the body is resisting that uptake of the hormone insulin that helps to regulate our sugar. And we know now that fat mass, so extra fat in the body, isn't just inert. It's not just like, in storage waiting for a famine to happen. It is there in case of a famine, but it's not just sitting there doing nothing. It actually is sending out signals, chemical messengers called cytokines, all the times that are gumming up the works, basically, and making insulin resistance worse. And so fat is pro-inflammatory, meaning it increases inflammation because of all those cytokines. So it's not great for blood sugar control, but it's also not great for heart health. So lowers insulin resistance if we can, get some of that fat mass lower. We can help lower our blood pressure as well, improve cholesterol, improve triglycerides, reduce certain risk of types of cancer, like especially like reproductive types of cancers, like breast cancer. Improving sleep, especially if the sleep disturbance is related to weight, like sleep apnea, that's weight induced. Overall systemic inflammation. So, if you've got other inflammatory things like arthritis and even just like aches and pains in general, can be worsened with increased inflammation. So, lowering weight can help with in that regard. And then also just, the actual weight on our joints and improving mobility. For both men and women, weight loss can increase fertility. If you are looking to become pregnant, that's a piece of the puzzle. Less urinary incontinence, both for females and males, especially for females. And then just, general feeling better and more energy, less fatigue, more ability to do the things that you're wanting to do. And maybe you have some other reasons, like, maybe you have some other benefits that you're thinking about specifically. But these are some of the, medical ones. All right, let me just take a look at the Q&A. Barbara says, I'm newly diagnosed type 2. Stay with this book, or do you recommend another for a beginner? This is a great book, Barbara. At the beginning stages especially, I would say stick with it. A lot of good information in here. It's really not any different information for the pre versus like the newly diagnosed, except that it's really not going to talk about medications, but you can talk about that with your pharmacist or your provider. Okay. Nancy says, I've been working on getting in more fruits and vegetables. Really, really good. I'm glad you're headed in that direction. You say you've got a ways to go, but it's more than you were getting. So yeah, and that's really what counts is we don't want to make these changes like so dramatic overnight and so quickly that they are not sustainable for you. They really want to be like long-term things you can implement. So I think you're probably going about it in a more realistic manner. Great. Okay. Let me see here. All right. The next slide just talks about how oftentimes when we're thinking about like weight management, oftentimes we have these really big goals, like massive goals, and we want it to happen quickly. But the reality is that even small amounts make a big difference on our insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. So 5% of body weight loss has been shown in the research to improve insulin sensitivity, improve that, response to the insulin, can help reduce liver in the fat. A lot of us have fatty liver. It is an epidemic right now in the United States that does go along with obesity. And of course, other benefits as well, like blood pressure and cholesterol are seen with small amounts of body weight. And if we do the math on that, it's not very much. Like for a 200-pound person, that's only 10 pounds weight loss to see significant. And by significant, I mean like clinically significant in the research. Like we know it wasn't just a fluke. We, comparing to like a non-intervention group, it was a statistical difference seen. So, a lot of times we overshoot or we kind of like overstate our goals, or we want it to happen so quickly, or we want it to be so much that then we don't make it realistic enough that we actually stick with it. So I want you to have some really realistic goals if this is something that you want to be working on. And per the NIH, or the National Institutes of Health, the recommendation is 5 to 10% of total body weight loss over a 3 to 6 month period. That includes some plateaus in there. And I know that a lot of us get frustrated or feel like things aren't working when we're in those like little stair step, like the little plateau areas. But just know that that's actually a really healthy and normal part of weight loss, where the body is like resetting at that lower number. So don't skip over those. Those are really, really important to the big picture. And then the other thing to consider is the rate. So we want about a half a pound, no more than a pound per week for people who are in that overweight category, and maybe up to 2 pounds a week for people in the obese category. But what we see beyond that 2 pounds a week, if that's consistently happening, higher than that 2 pounds a week, we see more muscle loss. And so we want to be really careful about the muscle loss, because it's not so much the number on the scale that matters, it's what kind of mass do you have. So when we look at our BMI chart, this next page, you probably have all seen this, but the caveat is we don't know what kind of weight this is. So BMI is basically just weight for your height, or pounds per inches. But we don't know if that's like, is that good bone density and high muscle mass kind of weight? And if so, a lot of our, bodybuilders, for example, or somebody like my husband who's like skinny and strong, would be in the overweight category when actually his fat mass is really, really low. And so BMI doesn't tell us the whole picture of what's going on. And it definitely doesn't tell us like what kind of mass it is. So this is another thing that sometimes people find frustrating, is when you start making changes, and especially for those of you who have joined us for the previous classes, and hopefully you're starting to do more exercise. Sometimes we're putting on a little bit of muscle, and if you're putting on muscle, that can affect the number on the scale. So it might not be going down as fast, but that's okay, because I'd rather have you put on muscle and have the number be the same than just not having that muscle there, because long term the muscle is going to mean you're more metabolically active, and it's going to mean long term your weight management is going to be headed in a better direction. So BMI is very limited, but if you haven't seen that before, you can certainly figure out where you're at in this chart, and you'll get these slides later. Okay, let me just check on the Q&A. Yeah, how do we find our actual mass? So for the actual the BMI, you can just take your inches, you can use that graph to figure it out where you're at in that either green, yellow, or red category. And then another, more better way actually is a DEXA scan. And some of you may have had that already for looking at your bone density, but a DEXA scan can tell you percentage of fat mass. And that's the most specific or accurate way that we have of measuring it. So, if you're due for a bone density scan anyway, you can, just also look at the percentage of fat, and that could be a baseline for making some changes for the future. This is the other thing with when you're talking about weight loss, if the weight loss is bone mass and muscle mass, we don't view that as a good trajectory, right? And we are naturally losing those things as we age, both bone density and muscle mass. So it's something that we have to actively fight against. So I don't want you losing weight just for weight loss sake. I want you gaining muscle, at least maintaining, maybe hopefully gaining some bone density, but thinking more about like something else like this, like waist circumference, like losing inches not just a number, right? So the inches, especially that abdominal adiposity, that's what we see is more directly related with that insulin resistance. So that's the type of fat. It's not so much the fat that's in our muscles or the fat that's on our hips. It's really the fat that's around our visceral organs that is increasing that insulin resistance more. We do want to think about that circumference. And maybe that's something different to track, something that you haven't looked at before. And if you're really obsessing over like the scale or the numbers, maybe just get rid of the scale for a while. And if you want to track something else, you could look at that. You could just track how you're feeling, your energy or your fatigue levels, sleep quality, improvements in your dietary intake, maybe reduce pain or inflammation or improvements in strength and flexibility, or other things like blood pressure. But, maybe it's time to think beyond the scale and give yourself some kudos and see some wins in other areas that are being affected by the changes that you're making. Okay. And not everybody needs to lose weight, right? Even though prediabetes is associated with extra body fat, sometimes that's not what's going on for people. Sometimes extra weight is not the cause or part of the cause of their prediabetes or their insulin resistance. They might not have insulin resistance at all. They might actually be very sensitive, but maybe their pancreas isn't making enough insulin. So there are other reasons why prediabetes happens. So, I've had patients in the past who are normal weight, very active, high muscle mass, low body fat, but they had a viral infection that affected their pancreas, or they had a tumor that affected their pancreas, or sometimes it's genetics related. So yeah, there's other reasons. It's not always just weight related. And a lot of us need to actually gain in some areas, specifically the muscle mass. So next week, we're going to talk about meal planning. And one of the things we're going to focus on is, or next month, I should say, we'll focus in on lean proteins and how to fit those in. But I will say a lot of people are not getting enough protein, and especially not spaced over the day. So oftentimes we'll get protein at like dinner, but we may miss protein at strategic times like breakfast, like when you're breaking your fast, you've gone all night without eating. First thing in the morning, it's really nice to have a decent amount of protein there, like palm of your hand size, so that you are basically starting your day with really good fuel, but also stopping the muscle loss that happens overnight, because we're tapping in to our nutrient stores while we're fasting. And we know that as people get older, that happens more. So we have more muscle loss overnight. So it's really important to have protein at breakfast. And then it's also a use it or lose it scenario. So we actually have to use our muscles to maintain them. And we've talked a little bit in the previous classes about this, but we won't really get formally to exercise until month 8, because it might be month 7, but it's I think chapter 8 in your book. And the deal is we need both strength exercises happening and cardio. So the cardio is really helpful for circulation, of course, heart health, thinking cardio, but brain health as well. It's helpful for that neuropathy that can happen in prediabetes and in diabetes, to really get the nutrients all the way down into your teeny tiny capillaries, your fingers, your toes, have that circulation and nutrient exchange happening. So the cardio, the strength, and then the third mode of exercise is stretching. So don't forget the stretching. And we actually have research now that shows stretching also increases muscles, which we didn't really know that before, but it makes sense because anytime you put strain on your bones or muscles, your body sends more nutrients to that area, so it builds it back up. So the stretching and the resistance exercises are helpful for that. Okay. And if you need to gain weight, I would focus definitely on the muscle and bone density side of things. All right, so what do we know actually works? Because of course we're kind of in this, diet culture. There's, oh gosh, it's overwhelming. There's so many different diets out there. We talked about a few patterns last time that have been associated with health. But as far as overall weight loss from people who have lost significant amount of weight and kept it off, this is the National Weight Control Registry data, which is basically people who are living their free living lives. Like they're not in a lab. It's not a formal study. They are, sharing their data, but they're just living their lives without intervention. And they've lost an average of over 70 pounds and maintained that weight loss for over 5 years on average. And here's some of the things that they're doing. So definitely eating fewer calories, that is part of the equation. Having breakfast every day, maintaining a consistent eating pattern. And we're going to talk about both of those things next month. Why does patterning matter? Monitoring weight. So one thing I want to say about this is you don't want to get obsessive about the scale, and you don't want to be looking at it too often, because if you're looking at it like every single day, you're going to be seeing quite a bit of fluctuation, like water weight fluctuation. And if you're going for a little bit of weight loss, like let's say that your goal really is at 0.5 pound a week, how do you even see that in the scale, really? So, in the research, the recommendation is about once a week, maybe not at all if you are obsessed about it or it's a stressor for you, or you have a history of like an eating disorder, for example. Maybe you track something else. Track your fruits and vegetables. But for the people who are losing weight and keeping up, they do monitor weight occasionally to see where they're at. A lot of them keep food journals, but not all the time. And we'll talk about that next week a little bit too. But the tracking can be helpful because it's objective. And when we track something, we put a little bit more mindfulness into it. Oftentimes it does change either what we're choosing or how much we're choosing. And for some people, it really is just data. Like they can just put it down and like use an app, for example, see the numbers and adjust, their intake to meet their goals. For some people, I will say though, this can also become obsessive. So you got to know yourself. And if that's not for you, or if you find it is not supportive, then skip the journaling. Another behavior of successful weight loss people, I used to call them the losers, successful losers, is less sitting. So, less time just being sedentary. And we have very sedentary patterns right now in our current society. And then exercise on average is about an hour per day. And this is to maintain their weight loss. And the majority of them are just walking. So they're not doing anything super fancy, but they are putting in the time. So, and that answers Nick's question about exercise. Yeah, absolutely. The walking counts. And in fact, when you think about, I've mentioned this in previous classes, but I want to say it again. When you think about movement, every movement counts towards metabolism, towards blood sugar control. We have research showing as little as 2 minutes of movement after a meal helps lower the spike in your blood sugar from that meal. So yes, walks count, and really everything counts. So in our minds, we really want to make that shift from like, it doesn't have to be, this particular thing. Does it have to be this intense? Does it have to be this long? It doesn't matter. Move your body in whatever way that you like to move your body. Because if you're doing what you like, you'll do it some more and fit it in regularly. It's more about like the consistency and how often you're doing it. Especially around those meal times, because that's really going to help with those spikes in blood sugar. Okay. So this data was from people living in the real world, going about their lives. This data is from looking at actual trials, research trials. And these are the findings from a task force that was put together. It was a joint work by the American Cardiology Association, the American Heart Association, and the Obesity Society. And basically, the conclusion was any different dietary approach can work as long as there's an energy deficit. So as long as there's less calories than people are burning. So it could be high fat, low carb. It could be low fat, high carb, like a vegetarian diet. It could be high protein. It could be a balance of those macros. We really don't have a holy grail for macronutrient ratios at this point. So, when I work with people individually, we figure out what do they like? What do they tolerate? How are they currently eating? What are easy little tweaks we can make that are going to be sustainable for them, but realize a little bit of a deficit there while also giving them enough nutrients, like micronutrients, to support metabolism and overall health. So, don't get stuck on one particular pattern or diet. It's got to work for you. And then the other thing that was found is across all of this research, if you address diet, activity, and behavioral health, the success rate goes up significantly. So it's not just about, one thing. It's not just about diet, not just about exercise. It's also not just about mental health, but mental health is a big piece of the puzzle. And what I find a lot of times in my patient population is it's the mental health piece is getting in the way of making the diet and lifestyle changes. And if that's the case, then that needs to be addressed. If depression is getting in the way of making changes or sticking with it, that's a major thing. Or if trauma is a factor in using food as a coping mechanism, then that needs to be addressed. So, we see better success when you address all three parts of that stool. And then the last thing that they found was kind of shocking, but I think it's probably going to be shocking to you. Not so much to me, but it's just the frequency of follow-up. And, the best success is seen when people are checking in on this over 20 times a year, somewhere in that like 20 to 26 times range, which is almost like every other week. And that can be with a professional, it could be with a group, could be with a walking buddy, personal trainer, dietitian. It could be just, checking in with your partner, but something that's a little bit more formal than just being on your own, where you're actually talking about it with somebody else, because that check-in is really helpful for staying the course and maintaining the momentum to actually reach your goals. Lori asked about seeing the commercials for Golo. I'm skeptical. Have there been studies on it? Well, of course they'll do their own studies. internally. All of these places do their own internal things and say, oh, we've got research, which, they only have to share the research that they want to share. GOLO is also associated with some supplements, and we're going to talk about micronutrients in just a little bit here. I haven't seen good success in my patient population. Not that they don't have some, good things as part of, any plan, right? There is something to be learned. And that's what I always ask my patients, like, what are you learning from this? Like, or in your past, when they come in with 15 different diets that they've tried, what did you learn from these? Like, what really resonated with you? What worked? What didn't? Because there's always like something in there that can be a benefit now. Okay. Sorry, guys, needed a little coughing break there. Okay, here are some of the things that I see, pitfalls to avoid when thinking about making changes, especially for weight loss long term. One of those is just that, having unrealistic expectations. So setting your goals too high, setting the rate of weight loss that you expect to be too high. And then, when those goals aren't met, a lot of times we put that on ourselves and feel like we have failed when it was really like the diet that failed or the expectation was unrealistic in the first place. This is a long-term game. This is a long, long haul. So we really need to take a big picture view, and really think about like, how we take the steps to head in the right direction, not try and get there overnight. Another one is all or nothing mentality, which kind of plays into perfectionism. And I do see this in quite a few of my patients who tend to be like, on or off diets or like on or off exercise because they set up this ideal in their brain, like, oh, it's got to be a certain way and I've got to do it perfectly, or they just throw in the towel and then they're off their diet for a while. Or like it's the people who are like, oh, I'll start on Monday because I've ruined today. So, give me some more time. And that all or nothing mentality is really, really hard to maintain. It's just not a sustainable way to be living your life. And that perfectionism standard is not great either. So we really want to be thinking like, how do we incrementally build in these changes where it's almost like you don't even notice it at first. Like for those of you who are already making changes, like maybe you're putting in an extra fruit a day for a while and then you get used to that. Maybe you're doing your extra 2 minutes of walking the stairs after lunch at work, and then that becomes a habit and it's just built into your day, and then you move on to like the next thing, right? We want it to be incremental so that you don't feel like you have to throw in the towel at some point because it's just too much. With food especially, we don't want to get into the habit of this good and bad language, especially in our brains, because part of that actually translates then into how we respond to the food. And we do know that we have a bigger dopamine hit when we go and have food that is quote unquote naughty or on the do not have list. And so that plays into like overeating on the food, and it plays into some of this like addiction type response to foods. So ideally, we'd approach food or approach a meal very neutrally. And the other piece of that is when we put food into good and bad categories, a lot of times that translates into how we're thinking about ourselves when we have that food. Like, oh, I'm being bad, because it's not just about the food. Now all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm the one who's being bad for having the quote unquote bad food. And we just don't want to have that kind of negative language about food or our bodies. So ideally, start catching yourself when you start thinking in those black and white terms or good and bad terms with foods. That's a hard one to change. And then seeking the magic bullet. So I call it the, getting off the carousel. You think, oh, the horse over here is going to be the winner. Maybe this horse over here, and you try the different horses, but they're all on the same carousel, going the same speed, right? Um, so get off the ride, get off the carousel, so we can make some long-term changes. One approach, one anti-diet approach, if you've been somebody who's been on the carousel, is called intuitive eating. There's a great book out on it. It's not new, it's been around for a long time. And here's a couple of the principles of intuitive eating. One is the permission paradox, where basically they say all food fits, all foods fit. Not all foods fit the same, right? Like maybe you have Doritos once a year at a picnic, but it's not an everyday food for you, right? It's not saying that all foods are, fine all of the time, but we want to just take that power away from food, away from it being like good or bad. We also don't want to have any sort of deprivation or any sort of like guilt associated with it, because then it does give it more emotional power. And sometimes, I'll actually work on this with my patients, and we put the food in on purpose to just see like what the heck is going on with this food. Like, what do you like about this food? So we'll put it in on purpose and have them kind of journal about it. And when they put it in, at a time when they're not stressed, so we have them do it like at an emotionally neutral time and think about what they like. A lot of times they realize they don't even like this food. They're just having it because they've told themselves they can't have it. So, the permission paradox is a real thing. It's pretty powerful. So give it a try if that sounds like you. Honoring your hunger. A lot of us have hunger silence because of stress, caffeine. We might be overdoing it on the coffee in the morning. We might have undiagnosed sleep apnea that's causing us to have high stress hormones and high blood sugar in the morning. And then we're not hungry. There's a lot of reasons for hunger silence, and we want to kind of understand why. Chronic dieting can be one of those things. Chronic skipping meals. We can get into circadian patterns with our eating. And so we're like, oh, I'm not a breakfast person. And then you really don't feel like being a breakfast person because you didn't eat breakfast yesterday. So it's kind of one of those cyclical things. So, getting back into tune with your cues. What is normal hunger? When should it happen? We'll talk a little bit more about that next week with the meal planning and patterning. But along with that comes satiety. So the other side of the hunger coin is you also feel full. And oftentimes people who don't feel any hunger in the mornings and are skipping are then ravenous at night and overeating, and it's starting the pattern all over again the next day. So if that's you, you can think about how can you interrupt the pattern? Play around with it for the next month and see if you can like have a little bit more evenly spaced intake over your day. It's amazing what that will do for breaking the later binging or the later snacking. Hmm. Okay. Other things. Mindfulness is a big thing right now. We are very distracted by TV, by eating through our lunches, by I don't know, rushing our busy lives. So if we can focus on the food, slow down, actually savor and taste our food, that can help us feel more satisfied and actually eat less. Um, one strategy is aiming for the 80% full mark, which is in the Japanese culture, it's called hara hachibu. It's basically like you're satisfied, but you're not stuffed, right? So you're like kind of not even topped up. You're just like to the point where you're satisfied and you know that you can have a snack if you need it later, or you know that that meal is going to tide you over to the next mealtime. All right. I will send you, along with the slides, I'll send you an overview of the intuitive eating principles. I think that might be helpful. Okay, so how do you set up your environment for success? So you're really making the healthy choice, the easy choice. All right, so one strategy is, what is at eye level in the fridge? We are much more likely to gravitate and choose the first thing that we see in the fridge or the pantry. So if you do have like fresh fruits, cut up vegetables, nuts and seeds, or dried fruits in the pantry, if they can be at eye level, think about your environment. Is there fruit on the counter? When you open your pantry, what's the first thing you see? Maybe put in the chat one change that you could make right now, or in the Q&A, I mean, one change you could make right now to how your environment is set up. Maybe it's portioning. So, we've got these big box stores in the Northwest, we have Costco. Sometimes those portions are just way too big, and we know that we actually eat more out of a bigger vessel. So, get in the little snack bags, get in the little containers, putting your trail mix in smaller portions. That can be super helpful for just having a grab and go pre-portioned thing. So it's easy. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to wonder what the serving is. What else? Splitting meals when out to eat. The out to eat thing is really tricky because they give you like a serving, right? They serve it on a plate or a lot of times a platter, but really it's about 2 to 3 meals oftentimes from a calorie sense. So, splitting a meal, taking half home, having an appetizer size instead of an entree size. A lot of different strategies to use there. Joel says pre-cut fruit and veggie snacks. Many times I have good intentions, but end up grabbing snacks that are not healthy. And that's why snacks get a bad rap, right? Like we want them to be convenient. That's why we're kind of going for them. They're fast, they're convenient. And oftentimes they end up being the ultra processed thing because those are in little packages that we can just pop open. But yeah, the fruit and vegetables are cut up and ready to go, and we see them and they're there, you're much more likely to choose them. Nancy says, I just need to put a note in the pantry shelf that says, it's not in here. Oftentimes I'm just wondering or bored. Yes. So there's this great handout from the intuitive eating worksheets. Maybe I'll send this one as well. It's called Deconstructing Eating Behaviors. And it's all about why, like other reasons why we may be eating other than hunger. And boredom is a big one. Like sometimes we're just bored, or sometimes it's just a habit. Like we sit down at night in front of the television and I'm like, we associate the TV with snacking. We're not even hungry. We just had dinner, but here we are. And it's, it's a habit. Sometimes it's a feeling, and then we're trying to mask the feeling with food instead of addressing the feeling. So yeah, I'll send that handout as well. Okay. One other thing, think about your plate. This can be a good homework for you. Check your plate size. Our plates have gotten bigger over time. Ideally, we'd be aiming for about a 9-inch plate, and half of it would be vegetables. And by vegetables, I mean non-starchy vegetables. So basically all of your vegetables except for peas, corn, potatoes, winter squash, like butternut squash and acorn squash, and beans and lentils. Those are your starchy vegetables that go in the quarter of the plate. That's carbs. And then half of the plate, like even things like beets and corn that sometimes get a bad rap for being high in sugar, they're really not. They're non-starchy. They're mostly fiber. So half the plate vegetables, and then a quarter of the plate some sort of ideally whole food starch like brown rice or sweet potato. And then lean proteins to another quarter of the plate. Even just that little might be big actually. That shift alone, it can make a huge difference as far as like your overall balance of the meal, satisfaction of the meal, because you've got plenty of fiber in those vegetables, and your nutrient intake. So your micronutrients are high, as in vitamins and minerals, while the calories are staying on the wraps. So think about how your plate is set up. Okay. And then I do want to mention a couple nutrients of concern because I see these over and over in my patient population, but also in the research, being associated with poor blood glucose control. We know vitamin D is a real factor, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, and it does play a role in blood sugar control. Many people, the majority, over 50% of people in the Northwest are deficient in vitamin D. So if you have not had your vitamin D checked, I would highly recommend that. I do prefer that you get it checked because we don't really know how to supplement you if we don't know where you're starting from. So I'm happy to run a lab or run a calculation for you once you have a lab. You can always email me and say, hey, here's my age, how much supplements I'm already taking, my lab result, and my weight, and I will run a vitamin D calculation to see how much should you be taking to get it up to optimal levels for not just glucose control, but immunity and bone health and muscle health. It's a really big deal, and a lot of us are low. So get it checked. And then along with vitamin D, a lot of times people are missing the K2 that should be supplemented along with vitamin D. And the deal with K2 is that it helps move the calcium and magnesium that your vitamin D is helping you absorb out of your food, that K2 helps move it into your bones. Because we don't want to just like have extra calcium and magnesium and then have it hang out in our body to go stick somewhere else. We want it to go into your bones. So the K2 helps that. And the K2 is also associated with improved insulin sensitivity. So you can now find vitamin D K2 combos if you do need a supplement. Your antioxidants would ideally be coming from not a supplement, they'd be coming from food. So your vitamins A, E, and C would be coming from your fruits and vegetables. And again, there's that inverse relationship with insulin resistance. So the more you're getting from your foods, the lower the diabetes risk. B12, one thing with this is if you're on metformin, which a lot of people with diabetes are, but possibly even in the pre-diabetes range, you might be on metformin. And that blocks acid, which can then long-term lead to low B12 absorption. So if you've been on metformin for over 5 years, the recommendation is that you do get your B12 checked. Other reasons why you may have low B12 is if you don't eat animal products, or you're low on animal products, or if you have like an acid suppressor on board, like if you're taking omeprazole or something like that, that's reducing your acid, you won't be absorbing B12 as well. And we just know with age, general aging, we tend to make less acid. And then we also tend to eat less protein, which is where a lot of our B12 is found in like animal proteins. And so, you know, the elderly population has a higher risk of low B12 as well. Magnesium is one of those minerals that does like over 300 things in our body. It is associated with better blood sugar control, and most people are not eating enough magnesium. My favorite place to get it is in pepitas, the little pumpkin seeds. Of course, you can get it in dairy as well, but nuts and seeds are a source. And some people just need a little bit of a help with a supplement with magnesium. Okay. Give me just a second. Right. Other minerals that are associated with glucose control, chromium and zinc. If you are not eating animal proteins or getting enough protein in general, you might be a little low on these. And same thing with iron. So if you're not eating a lot of meat, or if you're a female of a certain age, like pre-menopause, and you're still menstruating, you may be losing enough every month that you could have some low iron stores. One thing with the iron is that it can really affect your overall, basically your overall glucose to red blood cell ratio. And some of you may have received an A1C, that hemoglobin A1C in the past, where it looks at, you know, the glucose attaching to your red blood cells and what that coverage is like. If you have low enough iron where it's affecting your red blood cells, that can affect your A1C number. But I find that in my patient population, a lot of times red blood cells look normal, like a normal lab panel looks fine. But then when I actually dig a little deeper and look at iron or look at a ferritin panel, which shows iron stores, the ferritin is actually low. And so when we can get that up, then all of a sudden that helps all kinds of things. It helps with blood sugar for sure, but it helps with energy. So then people are more likely to exercise. You know, it helps with recovery and fatigue so that you're going to do it tomorrow as well. So, you know, if you're having some symptoms, do a little digging, a little deeper than just a normal blood panel. because it doesn't really tell us your nutrient status necessarily. You got to ask for those things. And then calcium, a lot of people, especially if you're not doing dairy, you may be a little low on calcium. And that does have an impact on blood sugar as well. So, all this to say, like, with some of these nutrients, is we still need enough nutrition because we're really talking about, like, managing weight, but you still need enough nutrients, your micronutrients, vitamins and minerals for all these other things functioning in your body. So you can't just like cut calories without thinking about nutrition, because that can sabotage your blood sugar goals long term. All right, let me check the Q&A here. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad that I can actually talk and be here. Sorry for having to take a couple breaks, you guys, but thanks for hanging in there with me. Okay, we are almost out of time, and I think I'm down to my last slide here. So here's your homework for the coming month. Think about your muscle status. Where are you at with this? Are you actively working on gaining muscle? Are you maintaining muscle? Are you in that, with the majority of people, are you in that category of losing muscle? And what's your plan? Make a plan for maintaining your muscles. It's so, so important to your long-term trajectory of not just your weight, but your blood sugar control. It's huge. Can't be underestimated. And then if you have some weight to lose, and that's a goal of yours, then I would make a calculation to assess what is a realistic weight loss. Like, what's a realistic rate? And you'll get these slides later, so you'll be able to look at that little graph and those details. And then, identify some behaviors to help with that. Write them down so that they're real and you remember them. You can consider keeping a food journal for a week. It can be very informative as long as it's supportive to you and not harmful. And you could use either just like a notebook. For some of my engineers, they do Excel spreadsheets, get super detailed. Or you could use an app like MyFitnessPal or Lose It or Chronometer. But there's a lot of free options out there. And in the meantime, set up your environment. Think about how you make the smart choice or the healthy choice the smart choice. How you automate some of this stuff, and yeah, how to make it a little easier on yourself. And then I'll send you those intuitive eating handouts as well, because maybe there's some of that piece of the puzzle that you want to work on from like a mental health perspective. Okay, next month, meal planning, chapter 5, same time, same place. I will see you in the month of April. And let me just check the chat the Q&A one last time. Thanks for being here, guys, and thanks everybody joining us later on the recording. And stay well, wash your hands. Don't get this influenza, it's really terrible. All right, I'll see you in April. Bye-bye.